The Horizon Explorer drifted silently through the vast emptiness of space. Captain Susan White stood on the bridge, her eyes fixed on the swirling colors of the gas giant that filled the main view screen. This was the first human expedition to reach this distant star system, and so far everything had gone according to plan. "Captain, I'm picking up something strange," said Kelly Brown, her fingers moving quickly across her communications panel. "There's a signal coming from the far side of the planet." Susan walked over to Kelly's station. "What kind of signal?" "It's not random, Captain. Definitely artificial." Kelly looked up, her eyes wide with excitement. "I think we may have just made first contact." Alan Garcia, the first officer, joined them at the communications station. His military training made him naturally cautious. "Could be a probe from Earth that we don't know about." "No." Kelly shook her head. "The pattern is like nothing I've ever seen in our databases. This is something new." Susan took a deep breath. This was the moment every space explorer dreamed of, but few ever experienced. "Alert all senior staff. Craig, I want you on the bridge immediately." Dr. Craig Johnson arrived moments later, still pulling on his uniform jacket. The medical officer's normally calm demeanor was replaced with obvious excitement. "Is it true? Have we found someone out here?" Before Susan could answer, the ship's sensors began to beep loudly. Alan rushed to the tactical station. "Captain, something's approaching from behind the planet. It's moving fast." The crew watched in silence as a sleek silver vessel appeared on their screens. It was unlike any ship they had seen before, with smooth curves and a faint blue glow surrounding its hull. "It's beautiful," whispered Natalie Baker, the science officer who had just arrived on the bridge. "And at least 100 years ahead of our technology," added Paul Miller, the ship's engineer. He pointed to several features on the alien vessel. "Look at those propulsion systems. And those must be sensor arrays far more advanced than ours." The alien ship slowed as it approached, coming to a stop about a mile away from the Horizon Explorer. For several tense minutes, nothing happened. The human crew waited, hardly daring to breathe. "They're scanning us," said Paul, looking at his instruments. "Very thorough scans." Kelly's console lit up again. "Captain, they're sending some kind of transmission. I think they're trying to communicate." "Can you translate it?" Susan asked. Kelly worked frantically at her station. "The computer is processing it now. It seems they've analyzed our communication systems and are adapting to them. That's incredible technology." Finally, a voice came through the speakers. It was slightly mechanical, but clearly understandable. "Human vessel, we are the Xerlaxians. We come in peace and wish to establish contact with your species." Susan stepped forward. "This is Captain Susan White of the Earth vessel Horizon Explorer. We welcome peaceful contact." Over the next few hours, the humans and Xerlaxians exchanged basic information. The aliens invited a small delegation to visit their ship. Susan selected herself, Alan, Craig, and Kelly for the first contact team. The inside of the Xerlaxian vessel was even more impressive than its exterior. Everything gleamed with a polished metallic shine. Devices that the humans couldn't begin to understand floated in midair. The Xerlaxians themselves were tall, slender beings with bluish skin and large, intelligent eyes. Their leader, Commander Jetfall, greeted the humans with a slight bow. "Welcome aboard the Stellar Voyager. We are pleased to meet another intelligent species, though your technology is—" He paused, searching for a diplomatic word. "Still developing." Susan noticed the slight condescension in his tone, but chose to ignore it. "We're a curious species. We've only been traveling among the stars for a few generations." Jetfall nodded. "We have been spacefaring for over 1,000 of your Earth years. Perhaps we can share some of our knowledge." As the tour continued, the humans were both amazed and slightly intimidated by the advanced technology surrounding them. The Xerlaxians had devices that could create food from pure energy, medical equipment that could heal injuries in seconds, and navigation systems that made Earth's best computers look like children's toys. "Your vessel requires manual control?" asked Terleth, the Xerlaxian scientist, sounding genuinely surprised. "How inefficient?" We prefer to keep humans in the loop, Alan replied, trying not to sound defensive. It saved our lives more than once when systems failed. Terleth looked puzzled. Our systems do not fail. The meeting was going well despite the occasional cultural misunderstanding when disaster struck without warning. The ship's alarms began blaring, and the lighting switched to an emergency red glow. "Solar flare," shouted a Zerlaxian crew member. "Massive radiation spike approaching." Jetfall rushed to a control panel. "Impossible. Our sensors should have detected this hours ago." The flare hit both ships before either crew could fully prepare. The Horizon Explorer shook violently as systems overloaded. Through the viewport, Susan could see that the Zerlaxian ship was also in trouble, its blue energy field flickering and dying. "We're losing power." Paul's voice came through Susan's communicator. "Engine containment is failing." Both ships were now being pulled toward the nearby moon by its gravity. Susan realized with horror that they were going to crash. "Brace for emergency landing," she ordered. "All crew to impact positions." The next few minutes were chaos. The Horizon Explorer plummeted through the moon's thin atmosphere, emergency systems barely functioning. Susan could see the Zerlaxian ship falling nearby, also clearly damaged. With a tremendous impact that threw everyone against their restraints, the human ship crashed onto the rocky surface of the moon. Emergency lights flickered, and the sound of hissing air indicated hull breaches. "Status report," Susan called out as she freed herself from her command chair. Alan checked the ship's systems. Main power gone. Life support at 20% and falling. Hull breaches on decks 2 and 3. Casualties? Craig was already treating a crew member with a bleeding head wound. Several injuries, but no deaths reported yet. Through the cracked viewport, Susan could see the Zerlaxian ship about half a mile away. It had landed harder than their vessel, and smoke was pouring from multiple ruptures in its once perfect hull. "Kelly, try to contact them," Susan ordered. After several attempts, a weak transmission came through. Zetfall's voice sounded strained. "Captain White, our ship is severely damaged. Most of our technology is non-functional. We have injured crew." "We'll send help," Susan promised. "Dr. Johnson will bring medical supplies." Susan quickly organized her crew. "Paul, secure our ship and assess what can be salvaged. Natalie, check the environment. Is it safe to go outside? Alan, I want you to gather all emergency supplies, especially the survival kits." Alan nodded and headed to the storage bay. He returned minutes later carrying several compact backpacks. "Standard issue emergency survival kits, Captain. Each one has 3 days of rations, water purification tablets, basic medical supplies, multi-purpose tools, fire starters, emergency blankets, and portable shelters." Susan nodded. "Good. Craig, take 2 kits and head to the Zerlaxian ship. See what you can do for their injured." As Craig and 2 security officers prepared to leave, Susan grabbed one of the emergency kits. "This moon doesn't look friendly. We need to be prepared for anything." Little did she know how right she was, or how surprised the Zerlaxians would be by the humans' primitive means of survival. Dr. Craig Johnson trudged across the rocky moon surface with 2 security officers beside him. Each carried an emergency survival kit on their back. The landscape around them was barren and harsh, with sharp rock formations and a strange purplish hue to the ground. Craig checked his handheld device, which was still working despite the crash. "Atmosphere has enough oxygen to breathe, but there's some toxic elements too. Don't touch any of the local plants," he warned his companions. The native vegetation consisted of odd, spiky growths that leaked a yellowish fluid when disturbed. When they reached the Zerlaxian ship, they found it in worse condition than their own. Large sections of the once beautiful hull were torn open, and components that must have cost millions to build lay shattered on the ground. A group of Zerlaxians stood outside their vessel, looking lost and confused. Their commander, Zetfall, approached the humans with obvious relief. "Dr. Johnson, thank you for coming. We have several injured crew members." Craig nodded. "Show me to them." He followed Zetfall into the damaged ship, while the security officers stayed outside to set up a temporary shelter using materials from their kits. Inside, Craig found 5 Zerlaxians with various injuries. One had a deep cut across his chest. Another had a broken limb and the others suffered from burns and bruises. The Zerlaxian medical officer hovered nearby, looking frustrated. Our medical technology is non-functional, she explained. The regeneration units were damaged in the crash. Craig opened his emergency kit and pulled out basic medical supplies: antiseptic, bandages, suture materials, splints, and pain relievers. The Zerlaxian medical officer, who introduced herself as Vexna, watched with growing concern. "Those are extremely primitive tools," she said, her voice filled with doubt. "They've served humans well for centuries," Craig replied as he began cleaning the wounded alien's cut. "Sometimes the simplest solutions are the most reliable," Vexna observed with fascination as Craig stitched the wound closed by hand, applied antiseptic, and bandaged it securely. He then moved on to set the broken limb using splints from his kit and taught Vexna how to create a proper sling using fabric. "This is remarkable," she admitted. "You can perform medical procedures without any technology at all." "Not without technology," Craig corrected her. "Just with simpler technology. These tools have been refined over thousands of years." Back at the human ship, Captain Susan White organized her crew into teams. The Horizon Explorer couldn't be repaired without parts they didn't have, so they needed to focus on survival until rescue could arrive. "Paul, work with your engineering team to set up solar collectors from the emergency kits. We need power for communications and basic life support." The engineer nodded. "We can have them running in an hour, Captain." "Natalie, take a team and scout the area. We need to know what resources are available and what dangers exist." "Yes, Captain," the science officer replied, already pulling equipment from her survival kit. Susan turned to Alan. "We need a secure camp. The ship won't be safe with those hull breaches if a storm hits and the temperature is already dropping." Alan began unpacking the emergency shelters from the kits. Each one was a compact package that expanded into a durable tent large enough for 4 people. "We'll have them set up before dark, Captain." By the time Craig returned with news about the Zerlaxian injuries, the humans had established a functional camp outside their ship. Solar collectors provided power. 2 essential equipment and portable shelters stood in a protective circle. Kelly Brown had even set up a communications array in hopes of sending a distress signal. A group of Zerlaxians approached the human camp, led by Jet Fall and a tall, distinguished alien that Susan hadn't met before. "Captain White, this is Elder." "Vindrell, our chief scientist," Zetval introduced. "We've come to discuss our situation." Susan invited them to sit around the portable heater that Paul had set up. The Zerlaxians looked at the simple device with curiosity. "You've managed to create a functioning base with such limited resources," Vindrell observed. "Our crew is struggling. Most of our technology requires power systems that were destroyed in the crash. We're trained to adapt," Susan explained. "Every human explorer carries survival training." Alan joined them, offering packets of purified water to everyone. He explained to the Zerlaxians, "We used water purification tablets from our kits to make this safe to drink." The nearby stream tested positive for harmful bacteria. Terleth, who had also joined the group, took the water packet with a look of dismay. "You mean you chemically treated it without proper filtration?" "It works," Alan said simply. "We've been using these tablets for centuries. They kill any harmful organisms." The Zerlaxians exchanged troubled glances as they cautiously sipped the water. Natalie Baker returned from her scouting mission with concerning news. "Captain, the temperature is going to drop below freezing tonight, and there's a storm front moving in. Based on atmospheric readings, it could be severe." Susan turned to the Zerlaxians. "Your crew is welcome to shelter with us. Our emergency tents can withstand extreme conditions." "Our ship should provide adequate shelter," Jetval said with pride. But Vindrell looked less certain. "Commander, our environmental controls are offline. The hull breaches will make the ship dangerous in a storm." Before they could decide, the EI sky darkened rapidly. Wind began to whip across the rocky landscape and the temperature plummeted. The first ice crystals began to fall, sharp and dangerous in the gusting wind. "No time to argue," Susan said firmly. "Get your people to our shelters now." The storm hit with surprising force. Hail pounded against the emergency shelters, but the specialized fabric held strong. Inside, humans and Zerlaxians huddled together for warmth. Paul Miller showed the aliens how to use the chemical heat packs from their kits. Just squeeze and shake, he demonstrated, handing the now warm packs to the shivering aliens. They'll stay warm for hours. How does it work without power? A young Zerlaxian asked. Simple chemical reaction, Paul explained. No electronics needed. Throughout the night, the storm grew worse. The wind howled around their shelters, and the temperature continued to drop. Susan organized watches to check the integrity of the Po shelters and to keep everyone's spirits up. During his watch, Craig noticed a Zerlaxian scientist examining one of the emergency blankets with great interest. This material reflects over 90% of body heat, the alien said, yet it weighs almost nothing and folds to the size of my hand. What is this technology? Craig smiled. We call it a space blanket. Ironically, it was developed for our early space program about 200 years ago. Simple but effective. As dawn approached, the storm finally began to subside. The Zerlaxians emerged from the shelters looking surprised to be alive. Their ship in the distance had sustained further damage from the storm, with panels torn away and debris scattered. Is this a joke? Terleth asked nobody in particular as he stared at the human camp, still intact and functioning. We crossed 20 light years with technology that can manipulate gravity, and we would have frozen to death without your blankets and chemical packets. Susan patted the emergency kit beside her. Sometimes the simplest solutions are the most reliable, especially in survival situations. The Zerlaxians looked at the small backpacks with new respect. Their first lesson in human ingenuity had been delivered by the hostile moon, and it wouldn't be the last. The day after the storm, both humans and Zerlaxians worked to strengthen their position. Paul Miller taught several curious aliens how to set up more solar collectors to power essential equipment. Natalie Baker led a team to gather samples of the local plants, carefully testing which ones might be useful and which were dangerous. Susan watched as Alan Garcia demonstrated to a group of Zerlaxians how to use a simple tool from the emergency kit. It was a multi-purpose device with a knife, small saw, screwdriver, and several other functions folded into one compact unit. This single tool can help you build shelter, prepare food, fix equipment, and even defend yourself if necessary, Alan explained. The aliens passed the tool around, examining it with newfound interest. We have fabrication devices that can create any tool needed, said Terleth. But they require power systems and programming. This requires nothing. Exactly, Alan agreed. That's why we carry them. As the group practiced using various survival tools, Kelly Brown called out from her communication station. Captain, I'm picking up signals. They're faint, but definitely artificial. Everyone gathered around Kelly's equipment. She adjusted several dials on her receiver, which was powered by the solar collectors. It's coming from about 50 miles north of our position, Kelly said, pointing to a crude map Natalie had drawn. The signal pattern is irregular. Could be a natural phenomenon, but I think it's more likely a beacon of some kind. A rescue beacon? Asked Jetfall hopefully. Possibly, Susan replied. We should investigate. It could be our best chance off this moon. Before they could plan an expedition, a shout came from the perimeter of the camp. Frank Martinez, one of the security officers, was pointing toward a rocky outcropping about 100 yards away. Movement, he called. Something big. Everyone turned to look. At first, they saw nothing. Then a large creature emerged from behind the rocks. It was roughly the size of a bear, with 6 limbs and a thick armored hide. Its mouth contained multiple rows of sharp teeth and its eyes fixed on the camp with predatory interest. Everyone inside the shelters, Susan ordered calmly. A second creature appeared beside the first, and then a third. They began moving toward the camp with deliberate steps. They're hunting us, Frank said grimly, drawing his sidearm. Standard issue won't do much against that hide. Susan quickly assessed their options. We need to scare them off without wasting. Ammunition, any ideas? Paul rifled through one of the emergency kits. I've got something. He pulled out several flares. These might work. Bright light and loud noise could frighten them. Jetfall looked at the simple flares with doubt. Those are merely signaling devices, correct? Not weapons. Sometimes the line gets blurry in survival situations, Paul replied with a grim smile. The creatures moved closer. Paul, Frank, and Alan spread out in a defensive line. When the animals were about 50 yards away, Paul activated the first flare. It burst into brilliant red light with a loud hissing noise. He hurled it toward the creatures. The lead animal reared back, startled by the sudden light and sound. Paul and the others activated more flares, creating a barrier of noise and blinding light between the camp and the predators. After a tense standoff, the creatures backed away, disappearing behind the rocks. Simple but effective, Elder Vindrell remarked, looking at the flares with new appreciation. The brief victory celebration ended when Craig called for help from the medical shelter. One of the Zerlaxians who had been gathering samples with Natalie had been injured, apparently by one of the toxic plants. He touched some kind of spiny vegetation, Natalie explained as Craig examined the alien's swollen arm. It released a toxin that caused this reaction. Craig opened his medical kit and pulled out various supplies. I don't know if our antihistamines will work on Zerlaxian physiology, he told Vexna, who had been learning human medical techniques. Our medical systems would have analyzed the compound and synthesized a counteragent, Vexna said with frustration. Without them, I don't know what to do. Craig thought for a moment. Sometimes the old ways are best. We need to remove as much toxin as possible before it spreads. He prepared a solution using water purification tablets and salt from the rations. This might sting, but it should help draw out the toxin. As Craig treated the injured alien, Susan called a meeting to discuss their situation. Those creatures will be back, possibly with more of their kind, she said. And the beacon Kelly detected is our best hope for rescue. We need to make some decisions. Jetfall and Vindrell joined the human officers around the map. Our ship is beyond repair without proper facilities, Jetfall admitted. We must find a way off this moon. I propose we send a team to investigate the signal, Susan suggested. Meanwhile, we need to better secure our camp against those predators. Alan studied the map. The terrain between here and the signal looks rough. Mountains, ravines, more of those toxic plants. It would be a difficult journey. Impossible without proper transportation, Terleth insisted. We cannot possibly traverse such terrain with no vehicles. Susan smiled. Humans have been crossing difficult terrain on foot for thousands of years. We can do this. As they discussed the expedition, Frank and Paul were working on the camp's defenses. Using paracord, metal scraps from the ships, and materials from the emergency kits, they began constructing simple traps and alarms around the perimeter. A young Zerlaxian named Kralven watched them with fascination. What are you making? Tripwire alarms, Frank explained, showing how the contraption would make noise if something walked into the nearly invisible cord. And these are snare traps. They won't kill those creatures, but they'll slow them down and alert us. You created these defenses from almost nothing, Kralven said with admiration. Could you teach me? Frank grinned. Sure. Always good to have. Another pair of hands. As night fell, the camp was more secure. Craig's patient was recovering and the planning for the expedition to the beacon was complete. Susan had selected a team consisting of herself, Alan, Natalie, and 2 other humans, along with Jetfall, Vindrell, and Kralven, who had volunteered despite his elders' concerns. They were preparing their packs for the journey when a chorus of howls echoed across the rocky landscape. Everyone froze listening to the chilling sound. They're back, Frank said, checking his makeshift alarms, and they brought friends. In the dim light of the setting sun, they could see at least a dozen of the predatory creatures gathering on the ridgeline. The animals seemed to be coordinating, spreading out to surround the camp. They're intelligent pack hunters, Natalie observed. This is going to be more difficult than we thought. Susan turned to the gathered humans and Zerlaxians. Looks like we'll have to prove ourselves before we can search for that beacon. Everyone, prepare for a long night. As the creatures began their approach, humans and Zerlaxians stood together, armed with a combination of standard weapons and improvised tools. The Zerlaxians watched with growing respect as their human companions calmly prepared for battle, using what the aliens had once dismissed as primitive equipment. The night would test both species, but the humans' survival skills were about to prove their worth once again. The night of the Predator attack tested everyone in the camp. The creatures were smart and worked together, probing the defenses from different directions. Frank's tripwire alarms saved lives, giving early warnings before each assault. The flares kept the animals at bay, their eyes sensitive to the bright light. When morning finally came, the creatures retreated, but not before 2 humans and a Zerlaxian sustained injuries. Craig worked tirelessly, treating wounds with the dwindling medical supplies from the emergency kits. "We need to move soon," Susan told the gathered leaders. "Those animals know we're here now. They'll be back tonight, probably with an even better plan." Jetfall nodded in agreement. "The beacon is our best hope. We should leave immediately." After treating the wounded, they selected who would stay and who would go. Frank would remain, behind with Paul and several others to defend the camp and care for those too injured to travel. Susan would lead the expedition to find the beacon, taking Alan, Natalie, Kelly, Craig, and 3 Zerlaxians. Zetfall, the enthusiastic young Kralven, and the scientist Terleth, who had insisted on coming despite his earlier doubts. "Take only what's necessary," Susan instructed as they packed. "Every ounce matters when you're walking 50 miles over rough terrain." Each member of the expedition carried an emergency kit, water, rations, and whatever specialized equipment their role required. Kelly brought her communications gear, Craig his medical supplies, and Natalie her scientific tools for analyzing the environment. The Zerlaxians watched with interest as Alan demonstrated how to properly pack a backpack, balancing the weight, and keeping important items accessible. "Your species does this regularly? Travel long distances carrying your possessions on your backs?" Terleth asked, adjusting his own pack uncomfortably. "Humans have been doing it for thousands of years," Alan replied. "We call it hiking or backpacking. Some people even do it for fun." Terleth looked at him with disbelief. "For entertainment? Carrying heavy objects long distances over difficult terrain?" "You'd be surprised what humans consider fun," Alan said. With a grin, they set out as the sun rose higher, following the route Natalie had plotted using her terrain maps and compass. The journey began over flat, rocky ground, but soon they reached the foothills of a mountain range that stretched across their path. "The signal is coming from somewhere on the other side," Kelly said, checking her equipment. "We'll have to find a pass through these mountains." The climb grew steeper as the day progressed. The Zerlaxians struggled with the physical exertion, unused to such demanding activity. Kralven adapted the quickest, watching how the humans moved and imitating their efficient climbing style. By midday, they reached a narrow pass between 2 peaks. The view from the high point was both beautiful and intimidating. Below them stretched a vast valley filled with strange vegetation, and beyond that, more mountains. "We'll camp here tonight," Susan decided, seeing the exhaustion on everyone's faces. "The pass offers good protection, and we can see anything approaching." As the others set up the portable shelters, Natalie studied the valley ahead. "Those plants are different from the ones near our crash site. More diverse. We should be careful when we descend tomorrow." Craig joined her, examining the vegetation through binoculars. Some look similar to the toxic species that injured the Zerlaxian. "We'll need to be even more cautious." While the humans efficiently established their camp, Jetfall approached Susan. "I must admit, Captain, I'm impressed by how well your crew functions without advanced technology. Our people are struggling with this environment." "It's not about the technology level," Susan replied. "It's about preparation and adaptability. Humans learned long ago that depending too much on any single system creates vulnerability." As night fell, temperatures dropped rapidly. Everyone gathered around. A small fire that Alan had built using materials from the emergency kits and dry vegetation they had collected. "Fire is perhaps the most essential survival tool humans ever discovered," Alan explained to the Zerlaxians as he carefully fed the flames. "It provides warmth, light, protection from predators, the ability to cook food, purify water, and signal for help. Terleth stared into the dancing flames. Such a simple chemical reaction, yet so vital. Our civilization moved beyond open fire centuries ago. Perhaps that was a mistake. The night passed peacefully, and they broke camp at dawn to continue their journey. The descent into the valley proved more challenging than the climb. The path was steep and loose rocks made footing treacherous. About halfway down, disaster struck. Terleth slipped on some loose gravel and fell, sliding down the steep slope until he crashed into a cluster of tall, spiny plants. His screams echoed through the valley. Craig rushed to help, carefully avoiding the dangerous vegetation. Terleth lay among the broken plants, their toxic fluid coating his skin. His leg was bent at an unnatural angle. Broken femur, Craig diagnosed quickly. And severe toxin exposure. We need to treat him immediately. The situation was dire. They couldn't move Terleth far in his condition, but staying in the open was dangerous. Using materials from their emergency kits, the humans quickly constructed a stretcher and a temporary shelter away from the toxic plants. Craig cleaned the toxin from Terleth's skin using purified water and the specialized wipes from his medical kit. Then he faced the more difficult task of setting the broken bone. This will be painful, Craig warned as he prepared a splint using materials from the emergency kit and straight branches they had collected. But it's necessary if you want to walk again. Jetfall watched with concern. On our world, we would place him in a medical pod that would repair the bone within hours. Can your primitive methods truly heal such an injury? Humans have been setting broken bones for thousands of years, Craig answered as he worked. It takes longer to heal, but yes, it works. After treating Terleth, they faced a difficult decision. They couldn't carry him all the way to the beacon, but leaving him alone was too dangerous. We'll split up, Susan decided. Craig and Zetfall will stay with Terleth. The rest of us will continue to the beacon. Once we find it, we'll send help back. No one liked the plan, but they all agreed it was the only logical choice. They left one of the shelters, extra supplies and a communication device with the group staying behind. As the smaller expedition prepared to leave, Lisa Wilson, the communication specialist who had been quiet for most of the journey, approached Jetfall. I've modified this communicator to boost its signal strength, she explained, showing him a device she had altered using parts from her kit. If you're in danger, press this button. It will send an alert we can track. Jetfall took the device, examining Lisa's modifications with surprise. You created this from a standard communication unit? Lisa nodded. Sometimes you have to work with what you have. The remaining expedition members continued through the valley, moving carefully to avoid the toxic plants. As they reached the far side by late afternoon, Kelly's equipment detected a stronger signal. We're getting close, she said excitedly. The beacon is somewhere on that ridge ahead of us. Susan looked at the steep incline with determination. We'll reach it tomorrow. For tonight, let's make camp and prepare for the final push. As they set up their shelters, Kralven helped Alan gather material for another fire. The young Zerlaxian had become increasingly competent with human survival techniques. Do you think we'll find rescue at the beacon? Kralven asked. Alan looked up at the ridge where their hopes now rested. I don't know, but whatever we find, we'll face it together. That's another human survival skill, cooperation. That night, as they sat around the fire, the small band of humans and aliens shared stories of their worlds and their lives, finding common ground despite their differences. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now, they had shelter, warmth, and hope, all provided by the primitive emergency kits that had saved their lives again and again. The final day of their journey began with renewed determination. Susan led the group up the steep ridge toward the signal source. The climb was challenging, with loose rocks and narrow paths that required careful navigation. The signal is getting stronger, Kelly announced as they neared the top. It's just ahead. When they finally reached the summit, exhausted but hopeful, they found not a rescue ship but an automated beacon. The device was clearly of human design, partially buried in the rocky soil. It's an emergency relay station, Kelly explained after examining it. Part of a network set up to help lost ships. It's damaged, but the emergency broadcast is still working. Alan knelt beside the device. Can we use it to send a message? Kelly studied the controls. If I can repair it, yes. It would send a signal much stronger than our equipment. Ships in the nearby system might pick it up. Do whatever you need to do, Susan ordered. The rest of us will secure the area and set up camp. While Kelly worked on the beacon with Natalie's help, Susan scouted the ridgeline. The view from the top revealed the vast, hostile landscape they had crossed. In the distance, she could see their crash site, now tiny and vulnerable. Kralven joined her, his young face showing concern. The others at the camp, do you think they're safe? Susan handed him the binoculars. Take a look. Paul and Frank know what they're doing. Through the binoculars, Kralven could see that the humans at the camp had expanded their defenses. They had constructed walls using debris from both ships and set up a larger perimeter of traps and alarms. Amazing, he murmured, building something from nothing. By late afternoon, Kelly had good news. I've repaired the beacon. It's now transmitting our distress call on all emergency channels. If there are any ships within a few light years, they'll hear us. That night, as they camped beside the beacon, Alan taught Kralven how to use the fire-starting tools from the emergency kit. The young Zerlaxian proved a quick learner, managing to create a small flame on his third attempt. I wish I could show this to the others on my world, Kralven said, carefully feeding his fire. We've become so dependent on our technology that we've forgotten these basic skills. It's not too late to learn, Alan encouraged him. When we get back, you can teach others. The night was peaceful, but sleep came with difficulty for many. They were all thinking about those left behind, at the camp and with the injured Terleth. Dawn brought an unexpected sound, the low hum of engines. Everyone rushed outside their shelters to see a ship descending from the clouds. It wasn't a massive rescue vessel, but a smaller craft of unfamiliar design. It's Zerlaxian, Zetfall confirmed via the communicator when they contacted him about the ship. They must have picked up our distress signal. The Zerlaxian ship landed near their position, and a rescue team emerged. Their leader, introduced as High Council Representative Dormac, seemed surprised to find humans and Zerlaxians working together. We detected both Zerlaxian and human emergency signals, Dormac explained. We were in a nearby system studying the gas giant when we received your transmission. Susan quickly brought the Zerlaxian officials up to speed on their situation. We have injured personnel at 2 locations. We need to evacuate everyone as soon as possible. The rescue operation moved swiftly. The Zerlaxian ship had advanced medical facilities that easily treated the injuries suffered by both species. Terleth's broken leg was properly set, and the toxin was neutralized in his system. As the rescue team prepared to retrieve the remaining survivors from the camp, Susan noticed Dormac examining one of the human emergency kits with curious interest. Your people survived for days in this hostile environment using only these simple supplies? The Zerlaxian official asked. We did, Susan confirmed. Sometimes the simplest solutions are the most reliable. Dormac shook his head in amazement. Our preliminary scans of this moon indicated it was unsurvivable without advanced environmental protection. Yet here you are. The Zerlaxian ship soon retrieved everyone from the main camp. Paul and Frank had successfully defended against several more predator attacks, using increasingly creative methods drawn from their emergency supplies and materials scavenged from the ships. As they all gathered aboard the rescue vessel, Elder Vindrell approached Susan. The once haughty scientist had a new humility in his manner. Captain White, I owe you and your crew an apology, he said. When we first met, I considered your technology primitive and inadequate. I was wrong. Susan smiled. Different doesn't always mean better or worse. It just means adapted to different needs. Indeed, Vindrell agreed. Our civilization has focused so much on advancing our technology that we neglected the fundamental skills that might save us when that technology fails. It's a dangerous oversight. The journey back to civilization took several days. During that time, humans and Zerlaxians continued to exchange knowledge. Craig taught Vexna more about human medical techniques. Alan showed interested Zerlaxians how to use various survival tools. In return, the aliens shared insights about their advanced systems. Kralven spent much of his time with the humans, learning everything he could. "I want to start a program when we return," he told Susan, "to teach my people these survival skills. Would your people be willing to help?" "I think that could be arranged," Susan replied. "A cultural exchange program would benefit both our species." When meeting said a nod, they finally reached the Zerlaxian home system. The news of their survival had preceded them. The story of how humans had survived on the hostile moon with primitive emergency kits had fascinated the Zerlaxian public. Dormak invited Susan and her senior officers to address the Zerlaxian High Council. In the grand chamber filled with the most powerful leaders of their civilization, Susan told their story simply and honestly. "We didn't survive because we had better technology," she concluded. "We survived because we were prepared for technology to fail. Our emergency kits might seem primitive to your eyes, but they represent thousands of years of human experience, distilled into the most essential tools for survival." The council listened attentively. When Susan finished, the head counselor rose to speak. "Captain White, your experience has taught us a valuable lesson. We have proposed a new initiative. All Zerlaxian vessels will now carry emergency kits based on your design, and crew members will be trained in their use." 2 months later, as the Horizon Explorer crew prepared to return to Earth aboard a newly commissioned vessel, they received a gift from the Zerlaxian government. It was a set of emergency kits, based on the human design but enhanced with certain Zerlaxian innovations. The note accompanying the gift read, "No longer a joke but a testament to wisdom. May we never forget that true advancement comes not from abandoning the lessons of the past, but from building upon them." As their ship left orbit, Susan looked at the emergency kit in her quarters. The simple backpack had saved their lives and changed an entire civilization's perspective. Sometimes, she reflected, the most powerful technology was also the most basic, the kind that worked when everything else failed.